Hey guys, MetalJesus here. Now today I'm excited to share with you my entire Nintendo 64 game collection. Now I have a little over 100 games, and that is comprised of a lot of the popular titles, some of the hidden gems, and even some of the more kind of odd or obscure games. So in this video, I want to share with you some of the highlights from the collection, some of my favorites, and also some of the N64 games that are suddenly kind of sought after and can be kind of expensive. Let's take a look. Now before we get started here, I do want to mention, like some of my other previous collection videos, that I go pretty fast. We have a lot of games to cover here, and for the most part, I'm not going to focus on too many of the common titles, although I'll point out some of them that I think are kind of interesting, but we are going to go fast and furious here. Now here you obviously see a bunch of the more common first-party Nintendo titles, but there are a few in here that I just want to point out, starting with these two Zelda cartridges here. You'll notice that there are two different cartridge labels. You know, it's funny because I didn't actually notice this until I was doing this video, that I had two different ones, and then doing some research, and it turns out actually there are several different variants if you're going to collect Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And from my research, it basically is that there are, I believe, 3 different releases of this particular game. Each one of them has different patch levels, different things that Nintendo fixed after release. And by the way, I have always loved how Majora's Mask has that lenticular cartridge label there that has that kind of pseudo 3D kind of effect to it. I always thought that was really cool. Now, one thing that I was really surprised to see when I was doing this video is just how much Paper Mario has increased in price over the last couple years. I had no idea. I've had this in my collection for a while now, but Paper Mario on the N64 is becoming one of the more collectible, expensive games to get. I had no idea. But it is a fantastic game, so I can see why so many people want it in their collection. I love the mix of classic, Super Mario gameplay with role-playing elements. I've loved every single one of these, especially the GameCube version that came out. So definitely one of my favorites on the system. Also, I was really surprised to see that the Mario Party games have gone up in price. And by the way, guys, I mentioned the price simply because I just find these things kind of interesting. It's good to know if you are out and about hunting for video games. Maybe you go to a garage sale, or a pawn shop, and you see these and you're kind of curious which ones are collectible. I had no idea until I was doing this video that Mario Party 2 is one of the more valuable games on the system. Who knew? And one of the interesting things about the Nintendo 64 is just how many top shelf, excellent Star Wars games came out on that console. You see 4 of them here, and each one of these actually is pretty good. Of course, I love Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. That is a port of the excellent arcade game. I always call it Pod Racer, but it's actually just Racer. But then you also have Rogue Squadron, another game on the N64 that is just so good, as well as Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, and also Episode 1 Battle for Naboo. Now, Battle for Naboo is interesting because, I'm not a big fan of Episode 1, the movie, but this game is pretty cool, especially the first couple levels. It's really fun. There are also a lot of really good, high-quality first-person shooters on the N64. You see my collection of them here. Doom 64 being one of the standout titles there. That recently got a port over to modern systems, and I played it actually on my Xbox Series X. But you also have 2 of the Quake games, and then of course you have the 3 Turok games. And I think I've mentioned this before, but I love Forsaken 64. Basically, the Forsaken game was a game that I originally played on the PC. It is a Descent clone. So it's a first-person shooter, but it basically has, I think it's 6 degrees, I think is what you call that. It's very disorienting the first time you play it, but on the N64, actually, that's a really good version of it. It's one I go back to time and time again. And then, of course, you have some of the more, beloved games on the N64, including 007 GoldenEye, as well as Perfect Dark. Now, here's a bit of an oddity if you're not familiar with this game. It is Duke Nukem 0 Hour, and this is not a first-person shooter. This is actually a third-person shooter, and that is a bit of a surprise because, most of us think of Duke Nukem as being a first-person shooter, although, I guess to be fair, now that I think about it, it did start off as a 2D platforming game on the PC, so I guess maybe going to the third person isn't as radical as you might think. Now, this game also, I believe, came out on the PlayStation 1. I'm not sure if that plays any better over there. I don't like playing this game on the N64. I just want to point this game out in case you're curious about it. It is really hard to get used to because it uses the face buttons to move Duke around, but then you aim with the thumbstick. And honestly, the platforming is so frustrating. You see me just falling off of these platforms time and time again. But yeah, it's an interesting game. I'd love to know down in the comments if you remember this game fondly. Here's some more random N64 titles, including Iggys Wrecking Balls. This is a game that I believe is exclusive to the N64, and it's actually a pretty cool kind of 2.5D platforming puzzle game, or maybe I guess you would actually call it a racing game because there is a race going on here, but basically you control these balls that have this little face on it, and you can jump, you can grapple, you can do all these moves in these 2.5D levels, and it's just a really trippy and interesting game. It's kind of mixed for me. I love the design of this game, but I feel that it is hampered a little bit with the controls. It's one of those games where I feel like that if they were to remake or remaster this game today, it would be a much better game. I still think it's actually pretty cool on the N64, but I just think it would be a little bit better with a modern control scheme. I definitely want to mention Rocket Robot on Wheels. This is the very first Sucker Punch game that they ever made, and if that developer sounds familiar, well, they've been making games for decades now, primarily on the PlayStation consoles, but this is their very first game here, and it's a really high quality AAA title. You play as this robot that, as the name suggests, you are on wheels and you're going around this it's kind of disturbing sort of theme park, and it's got a lot of puzzle elements to it, but it's also got a lot of racing, basically a lot of variety in here, a lot of kind of physics-based puzzles. It's really only hampered primarily by, I would say, the frame rate and also the controls. That's something that's kind of common of the era. You sort of play this game and you wish it had two thumbsticks, but it doesn't. Primarily because, the camera itself is a little unwieldy, but the game itself actually is surprisingly fun. I highly recommend it. A couple more random cartridges here, including Robotron 64. This is one of the best versions of Robotron out there. I've talked about this game in the past. The N64 version is excellent. I love this game. It really uses the N64 controller in a very smart way. I mean, in many ways, it's kind of similar to a lot of other games where you move around and also aim with the buttons and also the thumbstick, but I guess it's the way it's programmed and the way it's designed. It's not overly frustrating. It just feels and plays great. Another one of my go-to N64 games that I talk about all the time, I'm going to talk about it here as well. That, of course, is Blast Corps by Rare. Just one of the many N64 exclusives that is so much fun to play, even today. It's a total surprise why we haven't got a proper sequel or HD remaster of this game, because the concept and the gameplay is still solid. It's still so much fun. And then here's another game I was really surprised to see how much it's gone up in value in the last couple years. I'm not entirely sure why. That, of course, is Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. Now, on consoles, this was exclusive to the N64, but you can get it on the PC as well. Now, I'm trying to figure out why this game is so collectible. I don't know if it maybe didn't sell very well or what, but basically, as you can see here, it is a 3D Indiana Jones game. Plays very similar to, say, Tomb Raider, and it's actually quite good. But as to why this particular N64 game has gone up in value, I don't know. I'd really love to find out why, because I just assumed it was a fairly common game, but maybe it's not. And then here you see I have a bunch of fighting games on the N64. Many of these I've picked up just randomly at pawn shops and also garage sales over the last couple of years. Typically, I would have no idea what these games are because I don't really play a lot of fighting games. And I'd see the cartridge, I'd be like, sure, I'll pick this up for $1 or $2. But yeah, there are a bunch of really fun and interesting fighting games that came out on the N64, including Mace, as well as Biofreaks, Dark Rift, and of course you have Killer Instinct and Mortal Kombat. But of course, the big granddaddy of all fighting games on the N64 is Super Smash Bros. And for some reason here, I have the Japanese version of the game. I don't remember why I have this in my collection. It's so weird. I must have been maybe doing a video or found this somewhere. Honestly, I don't remember. So it is kind of weird to see the main menu all in Japanese. That's pretty funny. And then here is a bit of an oddity. This is Tetris Fear. This is a game that attempts to mix up the Tetris gameplay, you know, that classic style, but it's doing it in this 3D top-down view. It's very bizarre. Because essentially what you're trying to do there, you see the little shadow of the pieces, is that you're trying to knock out other pieces around you to try to expose the core that lets whatever's in the sphere out. You know, this is a game that I like, but I don't love it because I'm not very good at it. It's one of those games where I see it and I'm like, yeah, I get this. This is pretty cool, but then I suck so bad. So I don't know. This is one that, again, it's a little bit of a, you know, kind of forgotten game, especially when there's so many great Tetris games out there. But I'd love to know down in the comments if it's one that you prefer to play. Here's some more random N64 cartridges, including Body Harvest. Now, it's my understanding that this is a very early Rockstar game, or at least the people who went on to make the Grand Theft Auto games. And you can kind of see the DNA in this title. It sort of drops you into this open world and you are driving around, stealing vehicles, blowing up these insects that are taking over the land, trying to protect people. You enter houses and interact with them. You do an awful lot in this game that, looking back, you're like, yeah, they use a lot of this in Grand Theft Auto going forward. Now, again, of course, it looks very early. It is a little bit janky, but it's still pretty fun today. Some more N64 cartridges that a lot of people have in their collection, including Shadow Man. Shadow Man is another one of these games that I believe probably took inspiration from, you know, Tomb Raider at the time, which was doing extremely well. That third-person action-adventure platforming sort of game. Shadow Man is a very cool game. It actually recently got a HD remaster for modern systems. That was done by our friends at Night Dive Studios. So if you are nostalgic for Shadow Man, but maybe you don't have an N64, definitely check out the remaster. Here's my box copy of Star Fox 64, and of course this is pretty interesting because it comes with this Rumble Pack in there. The Rumble Pack is something that pretty much seems like half of the cartridges prompt you to install when you go to play them. I never do that anymore, but you know, back in the day when this was new, obviously that would be a cool little feature, but you know, by today's standards, I don't think most people do that. Still, it's in fantastic condition. And then check this out. I have a not for resale Star Fox 64 cartridge. You see that little banner on the front right there, and then you flip it over and it's got the sticker. I'm trying to think what this might be used for. I mean, not for resale means it probably was either in a demo unit, like, you know, something you would walk up like a kiosk and play, or maybe it was sent to reviewers. I don't know. I'd love to know if you have, you know, some information or history on this cartridge. Let me know down in the comments. Star Soldier Vanishing Earth is one of the very few shoot 'em ups that came out on the N64, and for the most part this is a pretty decent game. As you can see, it is full 3D, which is something that's kind of unusual and definitely makes this game stand out. And what's cool about this game too is that it has multiple difficulty levels, and for the most part easy is stupid easy. So if you are somebody who struggles with shoot 'em ups, you know, typically, and you like to just learn the games first, definitely check out Star Soldier, because it'll let you play it on easy, and then you can bump it up to harder difficulties and give yourself some challenge. But yeah, this is a game I like a lot. And then I am a huge fan of the Kirby series. I think I've probably played them all, and the N64 version is one of my favorites. I just love the graphics. I think they did some really cool stuff with the series in this game. Actually, this might be one of my all-time favorite Kirby games on the N64. So if you haven't played it, definitely check it out. And now I mentioned this before, and it's so true, that there are just so many great racing games released on the N64. It's actually kind of weird. It's almost disproportionate to how many games were actually released on it total to how many racing games are on the system. There's just so many of them. I've actually done an entire video on this, and so I'm not going to dwell too much because there are a lot of them that I could talk about. As you guys know, I'm crazy about racing games, but I do want to mention a few of them. Now, one of them I haven't talked a ton about is S-Cars or SCARs. It actually stands for something. I forget what it stands for, but as you can see here, it is a Mario Kart 64 kind of clone, sort of kart racing game, but it's got its own vibe to it. It's got its own look and feel, and it's definitely one of the better ones. It's, dare I say, even a hidden gem. But I like it a lot. It's got some great graphics, really tight controls, really cool power-ups and weapons that you can use. Again, if you've played most of the kart racing games and you're looking for something new, definitely check out SCARs. Here are definitely some of my favorites. Now, I've already mentioned Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, that's down in the corner there, but the version of Hydro Thunder that came out on the N64 is a very good version. I do like the Dreamcast version a little bit better, just because it's a little bit higher resolution, better graphics, things like that, but the N64 version is fine. Of course, you have Wave Race. That is one of the first games I ever played on the N64, and it'll always have a warm spot in my heart. That's a great game. The version of Revolt on the N64 is a decent version, but kind of like Hydro Thunder, I do prefer the Dreamcast version simply just because it has better graphics, but nothing wrong with the N64 version. And of course, Beetle Adventure Racing is one of those games that I seem to always be talking about on the system. I'm not going to dwell on it here, but it is a very good game. It's exclusive to the N64 and should not be missed. And then Stunt Racer 64 is one of those games I am very happy that I picked up way early when I was collecting for the Nintendo 64, because these days that game is stupidly expensive. Again, I think it's probably people trying to go for complete collections, and because I don't think it sold very well, but it is a really fun game, so most people do want to play it. I think, unfortunately, that the value has shot up, so just be aware that is one of the more collectible games on the system. You know, I don't often talk about sports titles because, quite frankly, I don't really follow sports in real life, and therefore I don't really play a lot of sports games, but I know that there are a lot of sports fans out there, and the N64 got some that people consider to be, you know, pretty much classics, and so here are 6 that I have in my collection. And I will be honest, most of these have come from probably when I would just get an entire lot, like at a garage sale, things like that. You know, they would be included with other games, and so that's typically how they have landed in my collection. Now, as many of you know, in my game room, I have the, I believe, one and only N64 DD disk drive prototype that was developed but never came out in the US. And when that came into my game room, I also got a couple of the N64 DD games that came out in Japan. And so you see F-Zero X with the expansion kit here. So the idea being that you would get the main game, and then you'd have the ability to get more tracks and build more tracks and save them onto the floppy disk. as well as Doshin the Giant, which is a god simulation game that came out in Japan, and then also SimCity 64. Now, the irony is I can't play any of them because that US prototype is region locked to the US, and we never got any games for that prototype. So it's really weird to have these in there. It's primarily just because of show, just to show people what the system could have been if these games would have been ported over to the US. But I wanted to show these in this video because, you know, they are in my collection. All right, guys, well, it's a quick look at most of the games that I have in my N64 collection. Like I said previously, I'm very happy that I collected most of these years ago, because who knew that the market would just freak out and people would go nuts trying to get complete N64 collections, therefore making a lot of these games way more expensive than I would want to pay today. Also, a big thank you to people who have donated games and also boxes over the years. That is very cool of you. I do not take it for granted. You guys are awesome. And so for the most part, I have most of the N64 games that I would want, but I would love to know down in the comments if there are some glaring holes in my collection, some games that you think I definitely need to have in my collection. I would love to know that down in the comments below. And as always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my video. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.